Welcome to Silent Case Files. Tonight we open a case that should be impossible to solve. A crime has been committed. A victim lies dead. Yet the suspect has an alibi so perfect, so unshakable, that it seems the truth itself has been trapped. This is the Unbreakable Alibi, a Hercule-Style mystery where every answer leads to another contradiction and the killer appears untouchable. Because an alibi is more than a defense, it is a weapon, carefully constructed to end the investigation before it begins. But our detective knows one thing: no crime is flawless and no story is airtight forever. Somewhere in the timeline, somewhere in the smallest detail, the illusion will crack. Who designed this perfect cover? What secret lies behind the hours that cannot be questioned? Stay with us, because in this case, the greatest mystery is not who did it, but how they made it seem impossible. This is Silent Case Files, and the truth begins now. It was in the earliest days of October, one of those English afternoons that cannot decide whether to be summer's graceful farewell or winter's first thin threat, that I found myself once again in the company of Hercule Poirot, and once again regretting, as I so often did, the untidiness of the world at large. We had taken tea in his flat, where everything possessed a position and a purpose. The sugar tongs lay precisely parallel to the edge of the tray. The cups sat as if measured by compass. Even the little plate of medlins looked arranged by military drill. Poirot himself, immaculate in dark suit and pearl-grey tie, was in that mood of delicate satisfaction he wore when the universe obeyed his private laws. "My friend," he said, lifting his cup, "you will observe, the lemon slice, it is cut too thick. It offends me. It is an exaggeration." "You can't be serious," I protested. "It's lemon." "In the little things," said Poirot gently, "we may read the great, if a man cuts his lemon too thick, perhaps he also cuts the truth too thick, eh?" It was at that precise moment, naturally it was, that the bell rang. Poirot set down his cup with the care of a man laying a jewel into velvet. He glanced at the clock, then at me, as though this interruption had personally insulted the neat progression of our afternoon. Then he called, "Entrez." The door opened to admit a woman of perhaps 35, very handsome in a hard, modern way, dark hair dressed in severe waves, mouth painted too carefully, and eyes that held themselves like soldiers on parade. Behind her, an older gentleman hovered, his hat crushed between nervous fingers. He had the look of a man who had slept badly for several nights, and made no progress in improving the fact. The woman came in first, chin lifted. "Monsieur Poirot?" she said. "But yes, mademoiselle, Hercule Poirot. I'm Celia Rivington." Her voice was cultivated, clipped. "This is my father, Sir Alton Vane." The name struck me at once. Sir Alton Vane, art patron, collector, and, as the gossip columns never tired of mentioning, the owner of Vane Court, that splendid house outside Marlow, with gardens designed as though the earth itself had been taught manners. Sir Alton made a stiff inclination. "Monsieur Poirot," he said hoarsely. This is all infernal, you know." "Infernal." Poirot's eyes softened a fraction, as they did when he found honest distress. "Will you be seated, I pray you? You are in trouble. That is why you come." Celia Rivington did not sit at once. Her gaze moved over Poirot's room, taking in the severe order, the symmetry. Something in it seemed to please her, or perhaps only to steady her. Finally she lowered herself onto the chair as though surrendering, but on her own terms. "There has been an incident," she said. Poirot's eyebrows rose. An incident? A murder, perhaps? A theft? A scandal of the heart? A death? Sir Alton broke in. "Yes, a death, and they will say it is murder." Poirot's hands came together, fingertips touching. I knew that pose well. It was as though he built a little tent for his thoughts to gather beneath. "Tell me." Celia drew in a breath that caught, just for an instant, at the back of her throat. "It happened at Vane Court last night. We were holding a small house party. Very discreet, very respectable. Only 10 of us besides the servants." Sir Alton made a small sound, half cough, half groan. "Among the guests," Celia continued, "was Mr. Lucian Markham." At the name, Poirot's eyes sharpened. "The financier?" he murmured. "The man with the smile and the newspapers?" "Yes. He was a friend of my father's." Her mouth tightened as she said it. "He was found dead this morning, in the Winter Gallery." The Winter Gallery, I repeated, for I had once attended a charity exhibition at Vane Court and remembered the long glass-roofed corridor where pale marble statues stood in chilly splendor. Sir Alton nodded miserably. A damned place for it. Like dying in a greenhouse. How was he found? Asked Poirot. In a chair, Celia said, seated as if he had dozed off. But there was a small wound at the base of his skull. Quite neat. The doctor says it could have been caused by a thin instrument. Something like an ice pick. Sir Alton's fingers twisted his hat brim. They think someone struck him. Quietly. Efficiently. Poirot's gaze remained mild. And the police, they are already with you, I suppose? Yes. Celia's eyes flicked to me briefly, then back to Poirot. Superintendent Greaves. He has sealed the house. He has questioned everyone. And he is, how shall I say, very pleased with himself. That is often, Poirot murmured, a condition of the police. Celia leaned forward. Her hands, I noticed, were perfectly steady, but her thumb worried the edge of her glove again and again, a small unconscious motion. He believes he has the solution, she said, because the killer has an alibi that cannot be broken. Poirot's eyes grew thoughtful. Ah, Sir Alton blurted. It's absurd. How can you have an alibi that proves you murdered a man? Poirot turned his head slightly, like a bird listening. Tell me of this alibi. Celia's voice dropped, and something in her expression, an iron kind of shame, showed through the polish. They suspect me, she said, because the alibi is mine. I confess I stared at her. She looked back at me without flinching. My dear, I began, but Poirot's hand lifted softly, silencing me. You are suspected, he said, because your alibi is unbreakable. Yes. How unbreakable? Celia took a breath. At exactly 11:15 last night, she said, I entered the drawing room at Vane Court and sat down at the piano. I played continuously for 40 minutes. There were 8 people in the room listening to me. They will swear I did not leave the piano once. They will swear it on their lives. And Mr. Markham was killed when? The doctor estimates between 11:20 and midnight. So, said Poirot very gently, you were seen, you were heard, you were, how you say, on display. Celia nodded. And yet they suspect you. Why? Sir Alton burst out. Because Markham and Celia, there were words, a quarrel, he was a swine, he threatened her. Celia's eyes flashed. Father. But Sir Alton was beyond restraint. He threatened us both. He lent money. Then he tightened the rope. He wanted the collection. He wanted Vane Court itself. He said he would ruin us, ruin my name, her name, unless she... Celia stood abruptly. Unless I married him, she said. Each word clipped cleanly as a snapped thread. There, say it plainly. The older man sagged, as though the frankness struck him like a blow. Poirot nodded slowly. So, he said. The motive, it is provided on a silver tray. And yet the opportunity. The opportunity is denied by music. Yes, Celia said. Superintendent Greaves believes I arranged it, that I had someone else strike the blow, and that my performance was theatre, a perfect alibi. Poirot's eyes, suddenly very bright, rested on her face. And did you? He asked quietly. Celia stared back. No. The word fell into the room with a simplicity that made it oddly heavy. Poirot inclined his head as though acknowledging a courtesy. Bien. Then we must look for the person who profits from your perfection. Sir Alton reached for the edge of the chair, as if the very idea gave him something to hold. There are others, Celia said, more composed now that the worst was said. Others with reasons. Markham was not beloved. Poirot turned to her, attentive. Name them. She began to count them off, each name a bead on a string of carefully controlled dread. Captain Rupert Wycliffe, my father's guest, a charming man who cannot keep money in his pockets. Markham held his debts. Mrs. Daphne Harrow, widow, social climber. Markham promised her an investment. She says he cheated her. Dr. Anand Suresh, our house guest, a friend of my father's through charitable work. Markham mocked his hospital plans in front of everyone. Miss Lydia Kent, my companion. She dislikes Markham intensely. I cannot imagine why. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly at that. Not suspicion, Interest. And there is Mr. Adrian Vale, Celia continued. My father's secretary. Markham wanted him dismissed. Sir Alton added in a miserable rush. And the servants, of course. There's Greaves's pet idea that a footman will kill for a handful of jewels. Poirot smiled faintly. The police, they love the dramatic simplicity. Celia swallowed. One more thing, Monsieur Poirot, she said. There is something missing. Ah, said Poirot softly. Now we approach the heart. It was a letter, she said. Or perhaps several. Markham carried papers in a thin leather portfolio, always. He brought it to the house. This morning it was gone. The portfolio and everything in it. The papers, murmured Poirot. They were of importance. Yes, and the police, do they know? They know. They think it proves the motive for blackmail, for conspiracy, for my guilt. Her lips curled slightly. For everything they already wished to believe. Poirot rose. His small, precise body seemed suddenly to take on a peculiar energy, as though the little grey cells had scented their proper prey. Then we shall go to Vane Court, he said. Sir Alton exhaled, a sound like a man set free from under water. You will come. But naturally. Celia's eyes softened for the first time, only slightly, only for a second. There is something else, she said. Poirot paused, his hand on the back of his chair. Yes, mademoiselle? Celia hesitated. The faintest tremor ran through the steady line of her voice. In the winter gallery, she said, on the floor near the chair where Mr. Markham sat, there was a single white piano key. I blinked. A piano key, I repeated. But the piano is in the drawing room. Yes, Celia said, and her gaze held Poirot's like a challenge. A single key, as if someone had snapped it off and dropped it there. Poirot's expression did not change, but I saw the minute tightening of his eyes, like a man who has felt at last the first tug of the thread. A piano key, he murmured. Très intéressant. He turned to me, and for the first time that day his smile held a spark. Come, Hastings, he said, we go where the music makes the alibi and where the silence makes the murder. And with that we stepped out of his immaculate little kingdom and into the messy, treacherous world, where, as always, Poirot intended to impose order. The drive to Vane Court was conducted in a grey motor car that smelled faintly of leather and expensive restraint. Celia Rivington sat beside her father in the rear, perfectly upright, hands folded, as though she feared that if she allowed herself the smallest slackness, she might unravel altogether. Poirot and I faced them. He said little. Instead he watched, now the line of Celia's jaw, now the twitch of Sir Alton's fingers, watchful in that quiet way of his, which is not silence at all, but a kind of listening that includes the unspoken. At the gates a constable stepped forward, notebook in hand, and after a glance at Sir Alton's card permitted us through with the solemnity of admitting us to a funeral. Beyond, the drive curved between clipped hedges, the lawn stretching away with an almost insolent perfection. Even the trees seemed arranged by a gardener with a ruler. Yet the house itself, when it came into view, had an air of being slightly off balance, as though some private catastrophe had nudged it imperceptibly out of its proper place. Inside the entrance hall, the presence of the police announced itself immediately, a faint smell of damp wool and tobacco, a tread that was careful but not reverent, the discomfort of servants who could not decide whether to obey their employer or the law. Superintendent Greaves emerged from the library with the expression of a man who has been forced to spend his morning among people richer than himself and intends to punish someone for it. He was sturdy, pink-faced, and wore his authority like a coat that did not quite fit across the shoulders. "Sir Alton," he said brusquely, and then his gaze shifted to Poirot. There was the smallest flicker, recognition, resignation, irritation. "Mr. Poirot." I might have guessed. Poirot smiled with exquisite politeness. "Superintendent Greaves, you are looking very well. A little fatigued, perhaps, but then these affairs, they tire even the strong men." Greaves ignored that. His eyes went to Celia. "Miss Rivington," he said. "Back again, are you?" "I told you there'd be no leaving until we're done." "You told me," she returned evenly. "I have brought Monsieur Poirot." Greaves gave a short laugh. "Brought him, have you?" As if he's a doctor for sick consciences. Poirot's smile did not change. "Sometimes, Superintendent, the conscience is indeed unwell, but I come rather for the truth." Greaves made a little gesture with his hand as though brushing away a fly. "Truth's straightforward enough here, if you ask me, but you're welcome to look at the corpse. It's in the winter gallery still." I've kept it as found." Poirot's nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. The idea of keeping anything as found in that chilly corridor offended some private principle, but he merely inclined his head. "I thank you." We crossed the hall and passed through a set of tall doors that opened upon the winter gallery. Even in daylight it possessed a certain theatrical chill. The glass roof turned the sky into a pale, distant ceiling, and the marble statues, nymphs and emperors and gods, stood with frozen indifference. At the far end, roped off by a thin cord, a man sat in a high-backed chair, his head lolled slightly to one side. The pose was almost peaceful, except for the thin line of darkened blood at the base of the skull, and the way one hand lay palm up on the armrest, fingers half curled as though surprised. Poirot approached, his steps measured. He did not hurry. He never hurried. He stopped just before the cord and looked not merely at the body but at the space around it. His eyes moved like a reader scanning a page. Chair legs, scuff marks, the angle of the man's shoes, the light falling across the tiles. "Doctor says he was struck from behind," Greaves supplied. "Quiet, clean. He didn't even spill his drink." A small side table stood beside the chair. On it sat a glass, a pale amber liquid still within. Poirot nodded. "And the portfolio?" "Missing," said Greaves. "We've searched the room. We've searched his bedroom. Nothing." Poirot bent slightly, peering at the man's collar, the curve of his ear, the neatness of his hair. Then he straightened, and with a delicacy that made Greaves's bluntness look positively violent, indicated the floor. Where was the piano key? Greaves's mouth tightened. "Ah, yes, the dramatic clue," he beckoned, and a constable stepped forward to point at a small chalk circle on the tile, 2 yards from the chair. "It was there," said the constable. "Picked it up for evidence. Bagged it." "May I see?" Poirot asked. Greaves hesitated as though to refuse on principle, then thought better of it. He signalled, and the constable produced a paper envelope. Inside, wrapped in tissue, lay a single ivory-coloured piano key, white, glossy, chipped at one edge as though snapped from a larger piece. Poirot did not touch it at once. He looked at it as one might look at a word written oddly. "It is not ivory," he murmured at last. "It is the modern material, celluloid perhaps, and it is not from a child's toy. It is from a proper instrument." Greaves snorted. "There's a piano in the drawing-room. Everyone knows that." Poirot's eyes lifted, very calm. "Yes, everyone knows that." That quiet emphasis made Celia's shoulders stiffen. Sir Alton swallowed audibly. Poirot turned away from the body without so much as a dramatic sigh. "Superintendent," he said, "you have questioned the guests? Everyone. They've all got alibis, arguments, grievances. Rich people always do." Greaves looked faintly pleased. "But one of them has a motive strong enough to bring down the roof, and a little performance to cover the hour. Clever, I'll grant you." He nodded toward Celia. "She played. 8 witnesses, and she'd been threatened. And the papers are gone. It doesn't take Belgian grey cells to add that up." Poirot's expression remained courteous. "And yet you asked for no warrant to arrest her." Greaves flushed slightly. "Not yet. Sir Alton's a baronet. These things one must proceed carefully." Poirot's eyes flicked, very briefly, to Sir Alton's face, and I caught in them something like mild contempt for that particular kind of caution. "Then," Poirot said, "you will permit me to speak with the witnesses of this musical alibi." Greaves shrugged. "They're all in the morning room, like a flock of fancy birds. Go on then, but don't expect them to sing for you." We left the gallery, and as we walked, Poirot's gaze drifted to a statue of a young Apollo with a lyre stone fingers poised to pluck stone strings. "Hastings," he said softly. "It is interesting, is it not? In the hour when the music plays, the murder is done, and yet someone leaves behind a piece of music, like a signature." "A signature?" I whispered. Poirot's eyes remained on the statue. "Or perhaps a warning, or perhaps, how you say, a joke." He paused. "But tell me, my friend, who makes a joke at the scene of death? Not the timid, not the accidental. It is the person who believes himself very safe." Ahead of us, the murmur of voices rose, tense, hushed, then sharpening into quick, brittle laughter as the door to the morning room opened. The suspects were gathered exactly as Greaves had described, arranged in an uneasy semicircle, tea untouched on side tables, shoulders angled away from one another as though fear were contagious. They turned as we entered, some with relief, some with hostility, and one or two with the carefully practiced calm of people who had decided that expression itself was evidence. Celia took her place near the window without looking at anyone. Sir Alton stood behind her like a man trying, clumsily, to be a wall. Poirot remained in the doorway for a moment, surveying them as a conductor surveys an orchestra that has forgotten how to play together. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said mildly, "I am Hercule Poirot. You will forgive that I disturb you. But the truth it also disturbs." A tall man in a naval-cut jacket, Captain Wycliffe, I assumed, gave a short, humorless laugh. "Truth," he said. "We've had quite enough of that this morning." Poirot's eyes settled on him gently. "Ah," he said, "but we have had only the beginning. Now we shall have, if you permit me, the rest." Poirot advanced into the room with that unhurried certainty of his, as though the space itself rearranged to accommodate him. He did not at once begin to ask questions. Instead, he moved to the fireplace, where the fire had been laid but not lit, and adjusted quite unnecessarily a small ornament on the mantel, so that it sat precisely square. Only then did he turn, satisfied, to face the company. It was a curious assortment. Captain Rupert Wycliffe, tall and bronzed, with the restless hands of a gambler who would like, at this moment, to shuffle the entire room. Mrs. Daphne Harrow, draped in morning silk that looked too new, her smile fixed as if she feared her face might crack without it. Dr. Anand Suresh, slim, observant, his expression composed but his eyes intent. Miss Lydia Kent, pale and pretty, with the air of someone trained to vanish into corners unless called upon. And Adrian Vale, the secretary, neat as a pin, spectacles catching the light whenever he turned his head, his calm the calm of a man who has made a career out of other people's storms. There were one or two others, minor satellites of Sir Alton's social world, whose names I did not catch at once. Yet even without them, the air of the room felt crowded with secrets. Poirot clasped his hands. "I do not come," he said, "to accuse. I come to understand. You have all been questioned by Superintendent Greaves." "Yes." There was a general murmur of assent. Wycliffe gave a sharper nod, as though agreeing to something irksome. "Très bien. Then you will not mind if I ask again the same things. Sometimes the repetition, it is like the second look at a painting. One sees what one missed." Mrs. Harrow gave a small laugh that sounded as though it had been practiced in a mirror. "Do you think we've lied already, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's smile was almost tender. "Madam, in society we lie all the time. It is the oil that makes the machine run without screaming." Her smile faltered. He turned first to Captain Wycliffe. "You were in the drawing-room last night, yes, when Mademoiselle Rivington played." Wycliffe's jaw tightened. "Of course, we were all there, listening to a damned Chopin nocturne as if it were a courtroom oath." Poirot's eyes flicked over him. "You did not leave?" "No." "You did not go for a cigar? For a drink? For a little walk to cool the head?" Wycliffe's mouth twisted. "I would have liked to. But Sir Alton insisted. Celia plays so rarely, Rupert," he says, as if we were being done a favor. Sir Alton made a strangled sound, part apology, part outrage. Celia did not move. Poirot nodded, as though the complaint had been filed and placed neatly away. "Mrs. Harrow." "I was there," she said promptly. "I adore music." "That is charming," Poirot said. "But tell me, did you adore it continuously for 40 minutes? Her eyes widened fractionally. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Poirot said softly, "did you listen all the time? Your eyes, were they on the pianist? Your mind, was it on the music? Or were you thinking of other things?" Mrs. Harrow's fingers tightened on her handkerchief. "I listened. Of course I listened. One cannot help but listen." Poirot's head inclined. "Yes, one cannot help but hear." He moved on. "Dr. Suresh." Dr. Suresh answered in a quiet voice. "I was present. I sat near the window. Miss Rivington played very well." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You sat near the window, and you saw what?" "I saw the pianist," said Dr. Suresh carefully, "and the room, and occasionally the corridor beyond, when someone moved outside." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "Occasionally you saw the corridor." Greaves, who had positioned himself near the door like a watchdog, shifted his weight. I saw irritation creep into his expression. Poirot was pulling at threads Greaves had never noticed. Poirot turned to Lydia Kent. "Mademoiselle," he said, "you were there also, but you are the companion. You attend on Miss Rivington." "Yes?" Lydia looked at Celia first, as though seeking permission to exist. Celia did not acknowledge her. "Yes, monsieur. You watched her play." "Yes." Her hands always on the keys. Lydia swallowed. "Yes." Her feet always on the pedals. A faint flush rose in Lydia's cheeks. I did not look at her feet, monsieur." Poirot's voice remained mild. "No, that would be indiscreet. One looks at the face, perhaps. One listens. One does not stare at the pedals." Lydia's hands twisted in her lap. Poirot turned his attention to Adrian Vale. "Mr. Vale, you are secretary to Sir Alton, a man of order." Vale's expression suggested that order was the only decent thing in life. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. You also listened to the music." "I did. From where did you sit?" "Near Sir Alton, on the sofa." "And you did not leave?" "No." Poirot let a moment of silence settle, as though he were laying out pieces on a chessboard. "Now," he said gently, "I ask not only where were you, I ask what did you notice?" Wycliffe gave a harsh little laugh. "Notice? We noticed that Markham wasn't there." That produced a sudden sharp stillness. Even Greaves's smugness paused. Poirot's eyes turned slowly to Wycliffe. "Ah, Mr. Markham was not in the drawing-room during the playing." "No," snapped Wycliffe. "He'd had his brandy and his smug grin earlier, and then he vanished. Probably to count his money or write another threat." Sir Alton flinched. Celia's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot nodded. "So, the victim is absent at the time when the alibi is created." Greaves cleared his throat loudly. "We know all that." Markham said he was going to the Winter Gallery to look at the statuary. He liked to pretend he was a man of culture. Poirot's eyes moved to Greaves, polite and faintly reproachful. "Superintendent, you are very helpful, but please permit the others to speak." Greaves's face reddened. Poirot returned to the group. "When did each of you last see Mr. Markham alive?" Mrs. Harrow spoke first, too quickly. "In the library after dinner." "He was unpleasant." Dr. Suresh said, "In the hall, perhaps 10 o'clock. He was speaking with Mr. Vale." Vale adjusted his spectacles. "Yes, Mr. Markham asked to see Sir Alton's study. I told him it was locked." "What?" Poirot repeated softly. Sir Alton's voice emerged, strained. "My study remains locked when I have guests." "Because you possess valuables," Poirot said. Sir Alton's eyes darted. Because one is prudent." Poirot's gaze rested on him for a fraction longer than politeness required, then moved on. Wycliffe said, "I saw Markham at about 10:30, in the billiard room. He was with Miss Kent." Lydia made a small, choked sound. Poirot's eyes turned to her. "With you, mademoiselle?" Lydia's face went very white. He spoke to me. Only spoke." Wycliffe's mouth curled. He always only spoke. Like a snake, only hisses. Mrs. Harrow leaned forward, eyes bright. "What did he say to you, Lydia?" Lydia's gaze flickered to Celia again. Celia remained motionless, but something in the set of her shoulders suggested a contained fury. I don't wish," Lydia began. Poirot interrupted gently. "Mademoiselle, I do not ask to shame you. I ask because your words may save an innocent person." That phrase, innocent person, seemed to strike Lydia like a bell. Her lips trembled. "He told me," she whispered, "that I was wasted here, that I could do better, that he could help me." Mrs. Harrow gave a soft, contemptuous sound. "Oh, of course," Lydia went on, voice rushing now as if she must spill it all before courage fled. "He said he had papers that would ruin Miss Rivington. He said she would marry him, or," her voice broke, "or she would be destroyed." Sir Alton half rose, then sank back again, face grey. Poirot's eyes were very gentle. "And you believed him?" Lydia nodded miserably. "Yes. And after he spoke to you, where did he go?" "I don't know. He left me." "I went to the drawing-room." She clasped her hands. "I watched Miss Rivington play. I swear it. Poirot was silent for a moment. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing closer with the weight of that threat. Then Poirot said, very quietly, "It is strange, is it not, that a man who threatens destruction carries papers that can destroy, and those papers, now they are missing." Greaves's voice cut in, impatient. "Exactly, which is why we're looking at the one person who had reason to want them gone." Poirot's head turned slowly. "Reason, yes, but also ability." "Ability," Greaves echoed. Poirot's gaze moved over them all again, like a finger tracing the outline of a wound. "Superintendent," he said, "you have accepted the alibi because 8 people swear Miss Rivington did not leave the piano. But tell me, did anyone swear that no one else left the room?" There was a small collective shift. Eyes turned away. Someone's teacup rattled against a saucer. Wycliffe frowned. "What are you getting at?" Poirot's voice was mild, almost conversational. "I am getting at this, Captain. When we watch a performance, we watch the performer. Our attention is held. The room becomes blurred. A door may open. A shadow may pass. Someone may slip away for a moment, and we do not truly see because we are hearing." Greaves's lips parted, ready to dismiss it, but Poirot lifted a hand. "And yet," Poirot continued, "the murderer, if he is clever, he knows this. He does not need Miss Rivington to leave the piano. He needs only that the room believes she did not leave." Silence held, thick and uneasy. Then Dr. Suresh spoke, his voice controlled but edged with something new. "There was a moment," he said slowly, "during the second piece. I recall it because a draught came from the corridor. The door opened, or perhaps was not fully shut." Poirot's eyes snapped to him. "Yes?" "I saw, only briefly, a figure in the corridor, moving quickly." "Who?" Greaves barked. Dr. Suresh shook his head. "I could not say. It was only a dark shape." Poirot nodded as though this were exactly what he had expected. "And you said nothing of this before?" Dr. Suresh's mouth tightened. "Superintendent did not ask me what I noticed. He asked me where I was." Greaves's face darkened. Poirot turned to the group again, and now his voice carried a soft insistence. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, "I ask you, during the music, did anyone leave the drawing room? For even a minute?" No one answered at once. Their silence was not unity, it was fear, calculation, self-protection. Then, from the sofa, Adrian Vale spoke with careful precision. "I remember," he said, "that Mrs. Harrow rose at one point. She went toward the side table. She may have gone to the door." Mrs. Harrow's head snapped around. "How dare you?" Vale's tone remained mild. "I am only answering Monsieur Poirot." Mrs. Poirot's hand went to her throat. "I went to fetch more tea. I did not leave the room." Poirot's eyes remained on her. "You are sure, madam?" Her pupils seemed to shrink. "Yes." Poirot nodded slowly. "Perhaps," and with that single word, perhaps, he left her trembling, and moved his attention elsewhere, as though already certain that the truth lay in the very places they tried hardest not to look. Poirot let the tension hang only long enough to make it speak for itself. Then, with the air of a man tidying a drawing-room after an awkward guest, he redirected the conversation with a softness that was almost merciful. "We shall not quarrel," he said. "Already there is too much ugliness in the house. I ask only for accuracy." Mrs. Harrow drew a sharp breath and arranged her face again into something like composure. Yet the hand at her throat did not quite relax. Poirot turned slightly, so that his voice addressed them all. "Superintendent Greaves believes the murderer used Miss Rivington's performance as cover. That is possible. But there is a second possibility." Greaves gave a scornful grunt. "There's always a second possibility with you." Poirot inclined his head as though accepting a compliment. "Yes, always, because people, they are always more inventive than policemen suppose." He looked toward Celia at last. She had remained still through the exchange, as if movement would be interpreted as guilt. Now her eyes met his, clear, controlled, and burning with a contained desperation. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "you will permit me a question that is perhaps intimate." Celia's jaw tightened. "Ask it. Why did you play last night?" It was such a simple question that for a moment the room seemed not to understand it. Celia blinked once. "Because my father asked me." Sir Alton started. Celia, Poirot's hand lifted slightly. But why did he ask? At 11:15. Not at 9. Not after dinner as a pleasant entertainment. Why at that hour? Sir Alton's face mottled. It Markham had been. There were tensions. I thought perhaps music would soothe everyone. Poirot's eyes rested on him, mild and penetrating, or it would soothe one person in particular. Sir Alton's fingers clenched on the chair arm. Celia's voice came crisp. He asked because Mr. Markham told him he intended to speak to me alone later in the evening. My father wished to keep me in the drawing-room. A stir went through the group. Mrs. Harrow's lips parted in a small, greedy smile. Wycliffe's eyes narrowed. Lydia Kent went even paler. Poirot nodded slowly. Ah, so the music was not merely music. It was protection. Celia did not look away.
Yes.
Poirot's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then, mademoiselle, you played with a purpose. You understand, do you not, that this purpose may also be used against you? I understand, she said. I have understood all morning. Poirot turned away as though he had obtained precisely what he required, and addressed Greaves with polite firmness. Superintendent, I should like to see the drawing-room, the piano, and if it is possible, the chair from which the key might have been taken. Greaves's lips tightened, but he nodded. All right, but don't start dismantling the place. I've had enough of rich people fainting. We rose, the suspect's eyes following us, like birds tracking a cat. As we moved into the hall, I heard Mrs. Harrow whisper something to Wycliffe too low to catch, and Wycliffe respond with a bitter, incredulous laugh. Poirot did not glance back, yet I knew he had heard. The drawing-room was at the front of the house, windows looking out upon the lawns and the soft curve of the drive. In daylight it appeared cheerful, almost harmless, pale walls, family portraits, a scattering of tasteful ornaments. The grand piano sat near the window, its lid raised like a glossy black wing. Poirot approached it with reverence, as though greeting an old acquaintance, and then, with a sudden small frown, ran a fingertip lightly along the edge of the keys. "What is it?" I whispered. Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he leaned down, peered closely, and then straightened. "Superintendent," he said, "you have examined the piano?" Greaves folded his arms. "We looked at it, yes. There's nothing." Poirot's eyes remained on the keyboard. Nothing is a big word. He turned to Celia. "Mademoiselle, you played last night. Did you notice anything unusual?" Celia hesitated, and for the first time I saw a flicker, tiny but real, of uncertainty in her composure. "I know," she said. "Not at first." Poirot's head tilted. "Not at first." Celia's hands tightened together. During the second piece I felt a slight catch under my fingers, as if one key did not sit quite right. It was only a moment. I thought it was my imagination. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And you continued to play?" "Yes. One does not stop in front of an audience because of a feeling." "Très bien." Poirot murmured. "You did not stop." Greaves made an impatient sound. "Keys stick. Pianos get temperamental. It doesn't prove anything." Poirot looked at him. "No, it proves only that something can change without stopping the music." He leaned down and with delicate care pressed several keys. Each gave a clean, obedient note. Then he pressed the key nearest the center, an E, I believe, and it sank with the slightest irregularity, not quite level with its neighbors. Poirot's face remained calm, but I could see his satisfaction. He lifted the fallboard and, using a small handkerchief, slid his hand beneath the keys. A minute later he drew out something thin and black that had been wedged inside the mechanism, a strip of leather, folded. Greaves's eyes widened despite himself. "What the devil?" Poirot unfolded it. It was a narrow piece of leather cut with precision, and on one end a small smear of dark reddish-brown marred the surface. Poirot held it up. "A mute," he said softly. "A what?" I asked. Poirot glanced at me, almost indulgent. "A device placed inside a piano to silence one key. One presses, but the hammer does not strike properly. The note is muffled or absent. It is used sometimes for practice, sometimes for mischief." Greaves's face hardened. "You're saying someone tampered with the piano?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, And why would anyone do that? Poirot's eyes lifted to the room around us. The chairs, the positions, the open doorway. Because, he said quietly, if one key is silent, one may use that silence. Cecula stared. Use it. How? Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he moved to the side of the piano and examined the polished wood. He bent, peering at the underside. Then he straightened and looked toward the far wall where a gilt-framed mirror hung. Hastings, he said softly, stand where you stood last night. I blinked. I wasn't here last night. Poirot's eyes twinkled. True. Then stand where you would stand, if you wished to watch a lady play without appearing too devoted. I obeyed, slightly embarrassed, taking a position near the sofa where Sir Alton had said he sat. Poirot moved to the piano bench, sat down with an exaggerated straightness, and placed his hands above the keys like an actor preparing to perform. Now, he said, look at me. I did. In the mirror, I saw Poirot's reflection, his face set in concentration. And now, he continued, imagine you are listening. Your mind is on the music, your eyes are on the pianist, but your eyes are also sometimes on the mirror. You see the room behind you, you see who enters, who leaves. Mrs. Harrow's voice cut in from the doorway, sharp and strained. What nonsense is this? She had come in without anyone noticing, at least without anyone except Poirot. Behind her Wycliffe hovered, and Lydia Kent, drawn like a moth toward disaster. Even Adrian Vale appeared in the hall, his composed face slightly tighter around the mouth. Poirot did not turn. He kept his hands poised above the keys, as though he were still playing. It is not nonsense, madame, he said gently. It is psychology. You all watched Miss Rivington, but perhaps you watched also yourselves in the mirror. And in that watching, you missed what mattered. Greaves strode in behind them, scowling. I told you to stay put. Mrs. Harrow ignored him, her eyes fixed on the strip of leather in Poirot's hand. What are you implying? She demanded. Poirot finally turned his head slightly, just enough to meet her gaze. I imply nothing, he said. I observe. He laid the leather strip carefully on the piano lid. This mute was placed here before the performance, he said. That means someone had access to the piano beforehand. Someone who knew you would be watching the pianist. Someone who understood that a tiny absence, a missing note, could be a signal. A signal, Wycliffe repeated, incredulous. Poirot's voice remained mild. Yes, a signal heard only by the person who expects it. For the others, it is merely a fault of the instrument. For one person, it is a message. Now, Celia's breath caught. Now, to kill him. Poirot's eyes held hers. Or now to move the papers. Or now to open a door. Or now to meet in the corridor. Greaves threw his hands up. This is ridiculous. People don't arrange murders with piano notes. Poirot slid from the bench and stood, smoothing his cuffs as though he had finished a recital. Do they not? He said softly. Then why is there a piano key in the Winter Gallery? No one answered. The quiet in the room was suddenly alive, full of imagined footsteps, silent notes, doors opening a crack. Poirot looked at each of them in turn, his gaze gentle but unyielding. Somewhere in this house, he said, there is a person who listened last night not to be entertained but to be instructed. And as he spoke, a faint sound came from the corridor, quick footsteps, then the sharp intake of a servant's breath. A maid appeared in the doorway, face white with panic. Sir, Superintendent, she stammered. It's Mr. Markham's room. Someone's been in it again, and there's blood on the carpet. For one frozen moment, no one moved. Then Poirot's eyes narrowed, and I saw, with a chill, that whatever game had begun with a silent piano note had not finished playing its last bar. Greaves was the first to recover movement, as though his authority dragged his limbs into action. Stand aside, he barked, and pushed past the maid into the corridor. The rest of us followed in a compressed, uneasy knot. Servants shrinking back against the panelled walls, the suspects drifting behind like wary shadows reluctant to be seen, too eager. Markham's room lay on the second floor, and the climb up the staircase felt longer than it ought. The house had gone quiet in that peculiar way grand houses do when something dreadful has happened. Quiet not from peace, but from listening. At the top landing, Greaves snapped at a constable to keep people back, but in truth we were already too deep into it. No one wished to be alone in another room. Even the guilty, I thought, prefer company when fear begins to breathe down their neck. The door to Markham's room stood ajar. Greaves entered first and stopped short. "Well," I demanded, though my own voice sounded thin in the corridor. Greaves did not answer immediately. He stared at the floor as though it had spoken to him. Poirot slipped past him with astonishing lightness for so compact a man. He did not go straight to the stain. He took in the entire room first, a sweep of his eyes that seemed to measure distances and habits, the bed neatly made, the suitcase open on a chair, the dressing table laid with brushes aligned in a row, a man orderly in his vanity. Then, and only then, he approached the carpet near the foot of the bed. There, dark against the pale patterned rug, lay an irregular smear of dried blood, enough to alarm, not enough to speak of catastrophe. "That's fresh," Greaves said, and for once the smugness had fallen away from him, or recent enough. "Someone's been in here since we sealed the place." Adrian Vale, hovering in the doorway, spoke quietly. "This room was locked this morning. Superintendent, you saw it locked." Greaves swung on him. "Don't tell me what I saw." Vale's mouth tightened, but he said nothing more. His eyes flicked very briefly to the writing desk near the window, and then away again. It was so small a movement that I would have missed it entirely had I not been watching him at that instant. Poirot crouched, and with the corner of his handkerchief touched the edge of the stain. "Not wet," he murmured. "Not quite dry. It is in between. Like a truth half told." Greaves snorted despite himself. "Blood's blood." Poirot looked up, mild. "Yes, but blood also has a message. It says, 'Someone was hurt,' or it says, 'Someone wished you to think someone was hurt.'" He rose and went to the desk. The blotter lay square. A pen stood in its holder. A few sheets of paper were arranged as if waiting for dictation. Poirot did not touch them. He only leaned, smelling faintly, as though the air itself were a clue. "Tell me," he said softly, "what did you find exactly, mademoiselle?" The maid, a small girl with frightened eyes, clasped her apron. "I came to tidy, sir. I know I shouldn't." Superintendent said, "Only, Mr. Markham was dead, and I thought there would be—" She swallowed. "I saw the door wasn't shut properly, so I pushed it, and then I saw that." "And nothing else?" Poirot asked. She shook her head. "Nothing, sir. But the drawer." Her eyes slid toward the desk. "It's open a little. It wasn't open before. I'm sure it wasn't." Greaves strode to the desk, yanked the drawer fully open, and began rummaging with the confidence of a man determined to find something that will justify his mourning. Inside lay only the usual, a box of matches, a handkerchief, a small notebook, a pencil. Greaves's face darkened. "Nothing taken." Poirot's voice came gently. "Or nothing left." Greaves shot him a look. "What's that supposed to mean?" Poirot did not answer. Instead, he turned his attention to the fireplace. The grate contained a small heap of ash, very fine, as though paper had burned there recently and been crushed. "Superintendent," Poirot said, "have you permitted fires in these rooms today?" Greaves frowned. "No. Why would we?" Poirot pointed. "Then this ash, how is it there?" Greaves bent, peered, then straightened with a sudden stiffening of his shoulders. A constable moved forward, uncertain whether to look clever or merely obedient. Greaves barked. "Fetch the doctor, and fetch me that sieve. We'll go through it." Poirot's eyes remained on the ash. "It is not much," he murmured, "but sometimes one burns only what one fears most." Mrs. Harrow had followed us upstairs, despite Greaves's instructions. Now she stood at the back, one hand pressed dramatically to her chest. "This is monstrous," she whispered, "to break into a dead man's room." Wycliffe's laugh came harsh. "Monstrous?" Markham would have called it business. Lydia Kent had not entered. She remained in the corridor, clinging to the banister as if the house might tilt and spill her out of it. Celia stood very still near the doorframe, her face carved into control. Only once did her gaze move to the stain and then away again, as though looking too long might invite it into her. Poirot stepped lightly to the bed. He examined the pillow, the coverlet, the edge where the blanket had been turned down. He bent and looked beneath the bed. "What in God's name are you doing?" Greaves demanded. Poirot straightened. "I look for what is missing, Superintendent." "Missing? The portfolio's missing." "We know that." Poirot's eyes were thoughtful. "Yes, the portfolio, but I speak of something else." He crossed to the wardrobe and opened it, carefully, without touching the handles directly, using his handkerchief again. Inside hung Markham's clothes, suits, shirts, ties arranged with meticulous vanity. On the bottom sat a pair of polished shoes and a small leather case. Poirot lifted the case, opened it, and peered inside. Then he smiled faintly. "Ah," he said. I leaned forward. Inside the case lay a set of cufflinks, gold with a small crest. Very fine, very expensive, very ordinary for a man like Lucien Markham. Poirot closed the case and set it back as though he had merely confirmed something unimportant. Greaves exhaled, impatient. "What, sir? For God's sake, Poirot, speak plain." Poirot regarded him with mild surprise. "But I have spoken plain." I said, "Ah." Greaves made a choking sound. At that moment the doctor arrived, an elderly local man whose hands shook with the indignity of being dragged from his practice into the secrets of the rich. He and a constable began to sift the ash with a small kitchen sieve, shaking it gently. Grey flakes fell like dirty snow. A corner of something resisted the sieve's mesh. The constable plucked it out with tweezers. It was a fragment of paper, charred black along the edges. A few letters remained visible in the center. Part of a word, perhaps part of a name. Greaves snatched at it. Poirot's voice cut in, unexpectedly sharp. "Non. Gently, Superintendent. You handle it like a butcher." Greaves glared, but perhaps sensing for once that Poirot's caution mattered, allowed the constable to hold it out. Poirot leaned close, squinting. I saw the letters too, A-N-E, and beneath them, in a smaller line, the faint suggestion of figures, perhaps a date, perhaps money. Sir Alton, who had lingered at the threshold, made a sound like a man struck in the stomach. Poirot's eyes flicked to him instantly. "Sir Alton," Poirot said softly, "this means something to you." Sir Alton's face had gone a sickly grey. "No," he whispered. "No, it could be anything." Poirot did not press at once. He turned back to the fragment, then to Greaves. "A fire," Poirot said. "A broken seal. A blood smear. Someone has returned to this room not to steal, because the main thing was already stolen, but to destroy." Greaves's mouth tightened. "Or to plant." Poirot nodded. "Yes, or to plant." He stepped back, and his gaze drifted again to the stain on the carpet. He studied it not like a policeman, but like a man studying a person's expression. Then he murmured, almost to himself, "Where is the wound that makes this blood?" I felt a chill. Greaves heard it too. He swung toward the maid. "Has anyone been hurt? Any servant? Anyone at all?" The maid shook her head frantically. "No, sir. No. Everyone's been together." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Everyone?" The maid's panic faltered into confusion. "Well, not everyone. Mr. Vale, he came upstairs earlier. I saw him on the stairs." Vale's head snapped up. "I came to fetch Sir Alton's papers, at his request." Sir Alton stammered. Yes, I asked him." Poirot lifted a hand. "Calm. We shall return to that in a moment." He moved into the corridor, drawing us with him like iron filings to a magnet. "Superintendent," he said quietly, "you sealed the house. Yet someone returns to the victim's room, makes a fire, leaves blood, disturbs a drawer. That means either the ceiling is not so sealed, or the person who returns has authority to move without suspicion." Greaves's eyes narrowed. "You mean a servant?" Poirot's gaze slid, like a knife to Adrian Vale. "I mean someone who belongs everywhere in this house," he said softly. "Someone who opens doors as a habit." Vale's face remained composed, but I saw a tiny pulse jump in his throat, and then before anyone could speak further, a shout rose from below. A constable's voice, loud with shock. "Superintendent! Down here, quick! There's another one!" Greaves went rigid. For an instant he looked not like a policeman, but like a man who has glimpsed a trap closing. Poirot's eyes were very bright. "Another one," he echoed softly. "Alors, the game continues." And as we hurried toward the staircase, I could not help thinking of that silent piano note, an absence turned into instruction, and of the way murder, once invited into a house, seldom comes alone. We went down the stairs in a disorderly rush that felt indecent in so dignified a house. Greaves thundered ahead, constables close behind, while the guests trailed after in that peculiar manner of frightened people, eager to know, yet terrified of what knowledge might cost them. Servants clustered at doorways like pale witnesses, hands pressed to mouths, eyes wide and shining. At the foot of the stairs, a young constable stood in the hall, one hand braced against the wall as though the building itself might sway. "Where?" Greaves demanded. The constable swallowed. "The library, sir." Sir Alton made a small sound and lurched forward, but Celia caught his arm, steadying him with a strength that seemed borrowed from somewhere else. Poirot moved at a brisker pace than I had ever seen from him, though even now there was no panic in his steps, only purpose. The library door was open. Inside, the room was dimmer than the rest of the house, its heavy curtains drawn halfway as if someone had wished to conceal the morning. Books lined the walls in sober ranks. A large desk stood near the window, and on the rug before the fireplace lay a man. For a heartbeat I did not recognize him. Then I saw the neatness of his clothes, the familiar spectacles askew, and the thin, precise line of his mouth now slack. Adrian Vale. He lay on his side, one arm folded beneath him, the other stretched forward as though he had been reaching for something just out of grasp. There was blood, more than in Markham's room, darkening the carpet near his head. Mrs. Harrow gave a sharp, delighted little gasp that she tried to smother into horror, and failed. Wycliffe swore under his breath. Lydia Kent made a strangled sound and backed into the corridor, shaking her head as if denial could erase what lay before her. Greaves knelt, fingers going to Vale's neck. "He's alive," he snapped, and the words came out with a kind of angry relief. "Barely." "Doctor. Where's that doctor?" The doctor, who had been left upstairs with the ash, came puffing into the doorway, face red with exertion and outrage at being compelled to run in his own age. He pushed past Greaves, knelt and began issuing crisp instructions. "Get him on the sofa. Carefully. No, don't lift his head like that, you fool. Support the neck." Poirot did not help lift Vale. He stood just inside the room, looking down with an expression that was not pity and not coldness, but intense concentration. His eyes moved from the blood to the desk, from the desk to the fireplace, from the fireplace to the door. He was reading, I realized, not the man, but the moment. Greaves looked up, face flushed. "This changes things." Poirot's voice was very soft. "Yes, it changes the direction." "The secretary," Greaves went on, louder now, for the benefit of the room. "The one you were all looking at. So either someone's trying to shut him up." Mrs. Harrow gave a brittle laugh. "Or someone's trying to frame him, Superintendent." Greaves glared. "Madam, keep your poison to yourself." Poirot's gaze drifted to her, and she fell silent as though his eyes had closed a door. Vale was moved onto the sofa, the doctor bending over him, muttering. A smear of blood marked the sleeve of the constable who had lifted him. The smell of it rose sharp and metallic, cutting through the library's comfortable scent of leather bindings and old paper. Poirot walked to the desk. Upon it lay an open ledger and a pen knocked sideways. A glass stood near the corner, half full of water that had spilled slightly, leaving a crescent of dampness. Beside the glass was a small object, black and thin. Poirot did not touch it immediately. He leaned close, then produced his handkerchief and lifted it delicately. It was a fountain pen, expensive, its nib glinting, and along the nib, almost invisible in the dim light, there clung a faint smear of reddish-brown. Greaves saw it and swore. "A pen?" he snapped. "They stabbed him with a pen." Poirot's tone remained mild. "It is thin. It is sharp. It enters without a loud struggle. It is convenient." Greaves surged to his feet, anger and adrenaline making him clumsy. "All right. Now we've got something physical. Something real." Poirot glanced at him. "Superintendent, murder is always real." Greaves ignored the rebuke and turned to the constable at the door. "Who found him?" "You tell me exactly." The constable, young, pale, cleared his throat. "I was posted at the end of the corridor, sir. I heard a thud like something heavy dropped. I came in, and I saw him on the floor." "Did you see anyone leave?" Greaves demanded. "No, sir. Anyone at all?" "No." Greaves's face tightened. He looked as though he would like to arrest the corridor for refusing to cooperate. Poirot spoke quietly. "How long between the sound and your entrance?" The constable hesitated. "A few seconds, sir. 5, maybe less." Poirot nodded. And the door, was it open? It was. Not fully shut, sir. Poirot's eyes flicked to the door, so someone could pass quietly, leaving it almost closed. Greaves's mouth thinned. Or Vale fell and pulled it. Poirot's expression suggested that Greaves might also consider that the earth was flat. "Superintendent," Poirot said, "permit me." He moved around the desk, examining the rug. The bloodstain there was not a pool but a smear, as though Vale's head had struck the carpet and then been dragged an inch or two by the weight of his body settling. Poirot crouched, peering. Then he straightened and looked at the fireplace. The grate was cold, but on the hearthstone lay a small curl of paper, unburned, like a piece torn away before it could be fed to the flames. It had a waxy sheen, as though it had been handled. Poirot took it up with his handkerchief. On it was an embossed crest. Sir Alton made a sound that was almost a sob. Poirot turned his head slowly. "You recognize it?" Sir Alton's lips trembled. That is my personal stationery." The room tightened. Even Greaves paused, smelling a new direction. Celia stepped forward at last, voice controlled but sharp. "Why would my father's stationery be in the library fireplace?" Greaves seized on it eagerly. "Because someone was trying to destroy correspondence. Because Markham's papers involved Sir Alton. Because," Poirot cut in, very gently, "because someone wished you to think so." Greaves spun. "Oh, don't start that again." Poirot's eyes remained calm. "Superintendent, you have now two scenes, the dead man's room and the library. In both places, paper is burned. In both places, blood appears. In both places, a door is left, not quite shut." Greaves frowned despite himself. So, Poirot said softly, "either the same person moves in the same manner, or someone wishes to create the impression of sameness." Mrs. Harrow gave a small, breathy laugh. "How clever. We're being given little tableaus." Poirot's gaze flicked to her. "Madam, you enjoy the theatre very much." Her smile faltered. What do you mean?" Poirot inclined his head. "Nothing. I observe." The doctor looked up suddenly. "He's coming round." Vale's eyelids fluttered. A faint choking sound emerged from his throat. The doctor leaned close. "Mr. Vale, don't try to sit up. Who did this? Can you speak?" Vale's lips moved, dry and pale. His eyes opened, blurred, struggling to focus, and for an instant they fixed on Poirot with a startling clarity, as though in his confusion he recognized the one person in the room who might understand without being told twice. Poirot stepped closer, bending slightly, his voice very soft. "Mr. Vale," he murmured, "it is Hercule Poirot. You have been attacked. You must tell me one thing only, one word if you can. Who was here?" Vale's throat worked. His gaze slid past Poirot toward the doorway where the cluster of guests stood watching. His lips shaped something that might have been a name. Then his face tightened with sudden fear, pure animal fear, and he whispered, the sound barely more than breath, "The key." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The key." Vale's fingers twitched weakly on the sofa cushion, as if trying to grasp an invisible object. His mouth opened again, but the doctor pressed him down gently. "No more. You'll bleed again." Greaves leaned in, red-faced with frustration. "Key? What key? The piano key?" Vale's eyes rolled slightly, unfocused. His lips moved once more, and this time a clearer fragment emerged. 2 syllables, broken, ragged. "Study." Sir Alton stiffened as though a wire had been pulled through him. Celia's grip tightened on his arm. "Father," Greaves straightened, eyes sharp now. "The study, Sir Alton's study, the one you said was locked." Sir Alton's face had gone utterly blank, the blankness of a man watching his own secrets run out of places to hide. Poirot's voice was still quiet, but it carried an edge now, an intensity wrapped in politeness like steel in velvet. "Superintendent," he said, "I think we must go to the study. At once." Greaves hesitated only a second, long enough for pride to protest, then nodded. "All right," he snapped. "Everyone stays here. Constable, keep them back." But as we moved toward the door, Poirot's eyes swept the gathered faces. Mrs. Harrow's hungry composure, Wycliffe's clenched impatience, Lydia's trembling guilt, Dr. Suresh's watchful stillness, Celia's controlled dread. Sir Alton's brittle fear, and I saw, in Poirot's expression, something I had come to recognize too well, the moment when he senses that the truth is not far away, and that someone in this very house knows it and is prepared to spill more blood to keep it buried. Sir Alton's study was reached through a narrow passage off the library corridor, one of those discreet little arteries in an old house meant to keep private business away from public rooms. Greaves strode ahead as though he could outrun whatever unease had begun to gather in his belly. Poirot followed at his shoulder, not hurried now, but very alert. I trailed behind, aware of footsteps echoing in the panelled passage and of the quiet behind us where the house held its breath around a wounded man. At the end of the passage stood a door of dark oak, its surface polished to a dull sheen. The lock was old-fashioned, substantial. Greaves turned to Sir Alton. "Key." Sir Alton's hand went reflexively to his pocket, and then stopped, as though the motion itself had betrayed him. His face was a pallid mask. I do not," he stammered. Celia's voice cut in, sharp as a snapped thread. "Father always keeps the key." Greaves's eyes narrowed. "So where is it?" Sir Alton swallowed. "In my bedroom, in a pape's," and something like shame ran over his features. "In a small safe." Greaves made a furious sound. "So we've got to go hunting while your secretary bleeds downstairs." Poirot's hand lifted, calm. "Superintendent. A key is a small thing, but here it seems it is the big thing. We must obtain it properly. Yes, but also we must ask who already has it." Greaves glared. "No one has it. He just told you." Poirot's eyes remained mild. "He told you where he usually keeps it. That is not the same as where it is now." Celia's fingers tightened on Sir Alton's sleeve. "Father, did you take it out last night?" Sir Alton's eyes flickered just once to the study door. "No." Poirot's voice was very gentle. "Sir Alton, you are a man of habits. You lock your study. You put the key away. If last night you did something different, it is not a sin. It is only information." Sir Alton's throat worked. He looked suddenly older, the cultivated grandeur of him collapsing into a frightened father and a tired man. "I unlocked it," he whispered. "Briefly. After dinner. Markham demanded to see a document. He said it concerned an old purchase." His voice broke. "I did not want a scene, so I showed him something. Then I locked it again. I put the key back." Greaves seized on it like a dog on a bone. "So Markham was in here?" "For a few minutes," Sir Alton said miserably. "With me." "And what did you show him?" Greaves pressed. Sir Alton's eyes darted to Celia. "Nothing that concerns," Poirot interrupted softly. "Sir Alton, today everything concerns." Sir Alton's shoulders sagged. "A letter," he whispered. "Old correspondence. Nothing criminal." Greaves' face twisted. "We'll see about that. Come on, bedroom. Safe, now." We moved quickly through the hall and up the stairs again. The house felt different now, as if each corridor had grown ears. A maid passed with a tray and nearly dropped it at the sight of us. Greaves barked at her without meaning to, and she fled. In Sir Alton's bedroom, a large, tasteful chamber with heavy curtains and the faint scent of lavender, he went straight to a panel behind a painting. His hands shook as he pressed the catch. A small steel safe was revealed. He fumbled the combination, muttering. Then finally the door clicked open. Inside lay a few bundles of letters tied with ribbon, a small velvet box, and on top an old brass key. Poirot watched the key as a cat watches a bird. Sir Alton reached for it, and at that same instant the door behind us clicked. It was not loud, it was not dramatic. It was merely the small, final sound of a latch settling. Poirot's head turned like lightning. The bedroom door, I saw, was shut, and in front of it stood Captain Rupert Wycliffe. He held a small pistol. For a moment my mind refused the sight, as minds do when confronted with something that belongs to a different reality. Wycliffe, who had been lounging and sneering and swearing, now stood very straight, his face drained of its usual color, his eyes bright and hard with a kind of desperate determination. Greaves swore. "You bloody idiot!" Wycliffe's voice came sharp. "Don't move." Celia made a small sound, half anger, half contempt. "Captain, what is this?" Wycliffe's mouth twisted. "This is me being the only one in the room with any sense." Poirot's voice was very calm. "Captain Wycliffe, you are doing a foolish thing." Wycliffe gave a short, almost hysterical laugh. Foolish? I'm the fool if I let you open that study. I'm the fool if I let him. The pistol flicked toward Sir Alton. Hand you that key. Greaves took a step forward, hands raised. Put it down, Wycliffe. Don't make it worse. Wycliffe's finger tightened on the trigger. I said don't move. Poirot's eyes were gentle, and in them there was not fear, but a kind of sad understanding. You are afraid, Poirot said softly. Afraid of what is inside the study. Wycliffe's lips pulled back. You don't know what I'm afraid of. Poirot tilted his head. Ah, but perhaps I do. You are a man of debts. Markham held them, yes? He held you like a leash. Wycliffe's jaw clenched. He held everyone. He was poison. And now, Poirot continued, he is dead. But the poison remains, in paper, in ink, in the secrets he collected. Wycliffe's eyes flickered toward the safe, toward the key, toward the tied letters. Celia's voice came low and icy. Did you kill him? Wycliffe's gaze snapped to her. No, it came out too fast, too raw. Poirot observed him. You did not kill Mr. Markham, he said quietly. Because if you had, you would not now be pointing a pistol like a man in a corner. You would be calm. You would be, how you say, satisfied. Wycliffe's breath came harsh. Don't psychoanalyze me. Poirot's smile was faint. But it is what I do. Greaves shifted slightly, angling, trying to get a better position. Wycliffe tracked him instantly with the gun. Don't, Wycliffe snapped. Poirot took a small step forward, so small it seemed merely a shift of weight. Captain, he said, you wish to stop us opening the study because you believe that within there is something that will destroy you. Wycliffe's throat worked. It will destroy more than me. Poirot's eyes narrowed. More than you. Wycliffe swallowed. His gaze slid to Celia, and something like regret, quick, pained, flashed across his face. Celia's lip curled. Spare me. Wycliffe flinched as though struck. Poirot spoke softly. Captain, did Mr. Markham's portfolio contain papers about you? Debts? Fraud? Wycliffe gave a short, ragged laugh. Debts? Yes. Fraud? Maybe. But that's not the worst of it. Greaves barked. What's the worst, then? Wycliffe hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw the trembling edge of his control. He looked like a man holding a door shut against a flood. Then he said, very low, the worst is that if you open that study you'll find what he had on Sir Alton, and if that comes out, this house, this family will be finished. Sir Alton made a choking sound. Celia went very still. Poirot's voice remained gentle. So you are protecting Sir Alton? Wycliffe's laugh was bitter. Protecting? No. I'm protecting myself from what happens when he goes down, because when a baronet falls, he drags everyone with him. Poirot looked at him steadily. And yet you have attacked no one. You have only threatened. That means you are not the murderer. You are desperate. Wycliffe's pistol wavered slightly. The barrel dipped an inch, then rose again. Don't, he hissed. Don't talk to me like you know me. Poirot's voice softened further. Put down the gun, Captain. You are not a killer. And if you fire, you will become what you fear. For a long moment the room held still. 4 of us facing a trembling man with a weapon, the air thick with the scent of lavender and sweat and panic. Then, from below, faint but unmistakable, came a sound, the sharp ring of the telephone in the hall. It rang once, twice. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. Wycliffe's eyes flicked toward the door, involuntary. In that fraction of distraction, Greaves moved. He lunged, not at Wycliffe's gun arm, but at the hand with which Wycliffe steadied himself against the door. His shoulder drove into Wycliffe's chest. There was a grunt. The pistol went off with a deafening crack, and the bullet buried itself in the wardrobe door, splintering wood. Celia screamed. Sir Alton cried out. Poirot sprang forward, astonishingly quick, and seized the pistol as it clattered to the carpet. Greaves and Wycliffe grappled, crashed into the bedpost, and then Greaves forced Wycliffe down, wrenching his arms behind him. Idiot, Greaves panted. Bloody, bloody idiot. Wycliffe lay pinned, breathing hard, his face turned away in shame. You don't understand, he rasped. You don't. Poirot stood over him, smoothing his cuffs, as though he had merely caught a falling teacup. Captain, he said quietly, perhaps I understand more than you think. But now you have made one thing certain." Wycliffe's eyes flicked up. "What?" Poirot held the brass key between finger and thumb, letting it catch the light like a small, fatal star. "That key," Poirot said softly, "is no longer only the key to a door. It is the key to your fear. And fear, my friend, always points toward the truth." Downstairs the telephone rang again, insistent, impatient, as though the world refused to wait for our private drama. Greaves hauled Wycliffe upright, shoved him toward a constable who had arrived at the door, and barked, "Take him. Keep him under watch." Poirot turned to Sir Alton. "Now," he said very gently, "we go to the study." Sir Alton stared at the key in Poirot's hand as though it were a verdict. Celia's face had become a pale mask, her eyes fixed, unblinking. And as we left the bedroom, the ringing phone below continued like a warning bell, promising that whatever waited behind that oak door would not remain silent much longer. The telephone's ringing followed us down the stairs like a thing alive, impatient, accusing. In the hall a footman hovered near the instrument, pale as starch, his hand half raised as though afraid that answering might unleash something worse than silence. Greaves snatched the receiver. "Greaves," he listened, his face tightening, then flicked a glance at Poirot. Whatever was being said was not a simple message. It was information. "Yes," Greaves snapped into the mouthpiece. "Yes, I understand." "No, don't touch anything. I'll send a man." He slammed the receiver down with unnecessary force. "That was the station. Markham's car's been found on the road to Marlow, abandoned. Someone tried to wipe the steering wheel, and there's a smear of blood on the door handle." Sir Alton swayed slightly. Celia caught his elbow again, but her eyes remained fixed on Poirot, waiting for him to turn this fresh fact into meaning. Poirot's expression stayed composed. "Blood again," he murmured. "Always the blood, like punctuation in a letter." Greaves bristled. "It means someone moved his body, or moved his things, or moved themselves, and it means we've got more places to search." Poirot inclined his head, as though conceding the point politely. "Yes, more places. But first, this place." His fingers closed around the brass key. We went back to the narrow passage off the library corridor. Constables had been posted now, making the house feel less like a home and more like a theatre with guards at every door. Somewhere behind us, Vale lay wounded on the sofa, the doctor murmuring over him. Somewhere else, Wycliffe sat under watch, his pride shattered into a dangerous, unpredictable, sullen silence. And ahead, waiting with the patience of locked things, was Sir Alton's study. Greaves crowded close as Poirot inserted the key. Sir Alton stood a little behind, his face drawn. Celia was beside him, chin raised, as if daring whatever waited inside to do its worst. Poirot turned the key. The lock yielded with a small, reluctant click. He paused before opening the door, one hand on the knob, and I saw him glance only briefly at the others. It was not theatrical. It was as though he wished to observe the exact moment when anticipation became reaction. Then he opened it. The smell hit first. Stale tobacco, leather and paper. The particular scent of a room used for decisions. It was smaller than I expected, more severe. A desk, an armchair, filing cabinets, shelves of ledgers, a safe set into the wall behind a sliding panel. The curtains drawn tightly. Everything arranged with the rigid neatness of a man who believes disorder invites catastrophe. And yet, in the center of the desk blotter, something lay that did not belong to that neatness, a thin leather portfolio. Greaves made a sharp sound. There, Poirot's hand lifted. "Do not touch." Greaves ground his teeth but held back, though it cost him. Poirot stepped in, moving slowly, eyes everywhere at once. He did not go straight to the portfolio. Instead, he looked at the chair behind the desk, pushed back at an odd angle, as though someone had risen suddenly. He looked at the wastebasket, empty, lined with fresh paper. He looked at the fireplace, cold but with a faint dusting of ash as though something had been burned and then carefully cleaned away. Then he approached the desk. The portfolio lay closed, its clasp snapped. On the leather was a faint greasy mark like a thumbprint. Poirot produced his handkerchief again, lifted the portfolio by one corner, and set it carefully on a clear patch of blotter. Then, delicately, he opened it. Inside were papers. Many papers arranged in sections as though Markham's habits of control had followed him even to death. Letters, typed contracts, photographs, a small notebook in Markham's handwriting, and on top, clipped neatly, a single sheet of heavy stationery with a crest embossed at the top. Sir Alton made a sound that was almost inaudible. Not a word, more the release of breath from a man who has been holding it too long. Poirot glanced up. "Your crest again, Sir Alton." Sir Alton's voice was hoarse. "Yes." Greaves leaned over Poirot's shoulder, unable to restrain himself. "So Markham's papers were here all along. Convenient. Someone wanted them in your study, Sir Alton." Sir Alton's lips trembled. "I never—" Poirot spoke quietly. "We will see what they are before we decide what they mean." He examined the top sheet without lifting it. It was typed, formal, and bore Sir Alton's letterhead. Poirot's eyes moved along the lines. Celia watched him with a kind of ferocious stillness. "What is it?" she demanded. Poirot did not answer at once. He reached into the portfolio and removed another item, a photograph. He held it so only he could see clearly, then angled it slightly, allowing the edge of the image to catch light. Greaves saw and swore softly. Celia's face changed, just a fraction, but enough. Her color drained. "What?" she said again, and this time the word was smaller, as though forced through a tight throat. Poirot set the photograph down on the blotter, turned it toward them. It showed a woman stepping out of a car at night, coat collar turned up, face half in shadow. Yet even in that shadow, the line of her mouth and the sweep of her hair were unmistakable. "Celia," Greaves gave a short, vicious laugh. "Well, well, that's your unbreakable alibi, is it? You at the piano while you're out in the dark." Poirot's voice cut him off, crisp. "Non, look at the date stamp." He tapped the lower corner. Greaves leaned in, frowning. "Last week." Poirot nodded. "Not last night." "This is not proof of murder. It is proof of something else." Celia's eyes did not leave the photograph. "He followed me," she whispered. Poirot's gaze softened. "Yes, he collected you, mademoiselle, like he collected papers." He turned another page of the portfolio and drew out the small notebook. He flipped through it quick, practiced, as though reading a man's mind through his handwriting. Then he stopped. For a moment, the only sound in the study was the faint ticking of the clock on the shelf, and somewhere distant the muffled movement of servants. Poirot looked up at Sir Alton. "Sir Alton," he said very gently, "Mr. Markham intended to ruin you, not with the old story of money troubles, not with gossip, with something older, something that has teeth." Sir Alton's face tightened. "I don't know what you mean." Poirot turned the notebook slightly, so that Greaves could see the line he indicated. Greaves read it, and his face altered, satisfaction sharpening into sudden, wary attention. "What is it?" Celia demanded, her control fraying now at the edges. "Tell me." Greaves hesitated then, perhaps enjoying the power of being the one with the knowledge, read aloud in a rough voice. "Vane acquisition, 1919. Provenance questionable. Letter from—" He stopped, eyes narrowing, and looked up at Sir Alton. "This is about your collection, the pieces you bought after the war." Sir Alton's mouth went dry. "Those purchases were legitimate." Poirot's eyes remained calm. "Were they, Sir Alton? Or did Mr. Markham discover that one item, perhaps more, was taken from someone who could claim it, and he intended to use this to squeeze you?" Celia's voice came sharp. "Father, what is he talking about?" Sir Alton's hands clenched. "Nothing," he said desperately. "It's nothing. Markham was a liar." Poirot did not argue. He lifted another sheet from the portfolio carefully with a handkerchief. Beneath it lay a second letter, this one handwritten in a slanted, confident hand. Poirot's eyes scanned it. His expression did not change, but something in the angle of his head suggested he had just found the note he had been listening for all along. He looked at Greaves. "Superintendent, this is important." Greaves reached instinctively, then caught himself under Poirot's gaze and drew back with a grunt. "Read it, then." Poirot read silently for a moment longer, then spoke, not reading word for word, but giving its essence with a precision that made it feel like an accusation. "Mr. Markham wrote to someone in this house," he said. "Tonight, after the music, we settle this. You will bring what I asked for. If you do not, I will send copies to the solicitor and to the newspapers." Celia's eyes widened. "To whom?" Poirot's gaze moved, very slowly, across the room. Past Greaves, past me, to Sir Alton. Sir Alton's face cracked. "He wrote to me," he whispered. He left it in my study yesterday. His voice broke. I was going to speak to Celia. I was going to... Greaves pounced. So you knew he was threatening you. You knew there was a meeting planned after her performance. You didn't mention that. Sir Alton's shoulders sagged. I was ashamed. Poirot's voice was quiet. And what did he ask you to bring, Sir Alton? Sir Alton swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the wall safe as though it might spare him by swallowing the truth. The letters, he whispered. Old letters. My wife's. Celia's mother. Celia went utterly still, as though turned to marble like the statues in the Winter Gallery. My mother, she said, the word barely sound. Sir Alton nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Markham said, They proved something that would destroy us. Poirot's face was very grave now. And you intended to give them to him. Sir Alton's voice came out in a rush, broken and panicked. I intended to buy time, to protect Celia, to... Greaves slammed a hand on the desk. Christ! So the whole house party was a trap and you walked into it. Poirot, however, did not look at Sir Alton any longer. His gaze had dropped back to the portfolio, to the way the papers sat, to the neatness of Markham's arrangement. He reached in and removed one final item, a small, flat envelope. On it, written in Markham's hand, were 3 words. For after the music. Poirot held it for a moment as though weighing its gravity, then set it down without opening it. Celia's voice came raw. Open it. Poirot shook his head, very gently. Not yet. Greaves exploded. Not yet? We're drowning in not yet. Open the bloody thing. Poirot's eyes lifted to him, cool and unwavering. Superintendent. Someone attacked Mr. Vale because he said the key and study. Someone returned to Markham's room to burn something, and now, miraculously, the portfolio appears in this locked study. If I open this envelope too soon, I give the murderer what he wants. Greaves stared at him. And what's that? Poirot's voice was soft as velvet. A reaction. Panic. Movement. As if in answer, from the corridor outside the study came a faint sound, the lightest of footsteps retreating. Poirot's head turned instantly. Someone was listening at the door, and whoever it was had just slipped away. Poirot moved with startling speed. The door flew open, and he stepped into the corridor, his small figure suddenly all sharp intent. Greaves followed with a curse, heavier and noisier, and I came after them. The passage outside the study was empty. But at its far end, where it joined the main library corridor, a swish of fabric vanished, just the edge of a skirt turning a corner. Stop! Greaves bellowed. We rounded the corner and nearly collided with Lydia Kent. She stood there as though she had been conjured by fear itself. One hand clamped over her mouth. Her eyes were enormous, wet, and wild. Behind her the corridor stretched quiet and innocent. Doors shut, nothing stirring. Greaves seized her wrist. You! Were you listening? Lydia shook her head frantically. No, I was only... Poirot's voice cut in, soft but commanding. Superintendent. Gently. You grip her like she is a criminal. She is a frightened girl. Greaves snorted. Frightened girls can stab with pens, Poirot. Lydia made a small whimper. Poirot stepped closer, his gaze level with hers. Mademoiselle Kent, he said, tell me the truth. Were you at the study door? Lydia's throat worked. She looked not at Poirot but past him toward the staircase, as though calculating escape. Then her eyes flicked to Celia, who had emerged behind us and now stood in the doorway of the study, like a figure carved from ice. I heard voices. Lydia whispered. I was worried about Miss Rivington, about Sir Alton. I thought... Thought what? Poirot asked gently. Lydia's lips trembled. That something terrible would be said. Poirot inclined his head. Something terrible has been said, but I think you did not run away because of words. I think you ran away because of a sound. Lydia stared at him, trembling. Poirot's voice remained mild. You heard me say that if I open the envelope too soon, I give the murderer what he wants. And you became afraid, not because you are the murderer, but because you know what opening it will do. Greaves barked. Either you know or you don't. Which is it? Lydia squeezed her eyes shut, then opened them again and whispered. It will. He will. Who? Poirot asked. Lydia's gaze darted to Celia again, then down. Mr. Markham, she whispered. He said, If the music played, then after, everything would change. Greaves's grip tightened. "What did he say to you last night?" Lydia flinched. He didn't speak to me last night. Not after the billiard room. Not after she swallowed. But earlier in the week he spoke. He told me I could have money, a life, if I helped him." Celia's voice came cold. "Helped him do what?" Lydia flinched as though struck. "To watch, to listen, to carry messages." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Messages?" Lydia nodded miserably. "He said I was invisible, that people forget I am there," he said. "That was useful." Poirot murmured, almost to himself, "Yes, the invisible witness." Greaves snapped. "What messages? For whom?" Lydia's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her eyes rolled with panic. She shook her head hard, as if to throw off the question itself. Poirot's voice softened further. "Mademoiselle, the person who attacked Mr. Vale is capable of killing. Mr. Markham is already dead. Do you wish to be next?" Lydia's breath hitched. She whispered, "It was Mrs. Harrow." The words fell into the corridor like a dropped plate, sharp, irretrievable. Greaves stared, then barked a laugh. "Mrs. Harrow, the widow with the handkerchief?" Lydia nodded desperately. She met him, in the corridor, during the music. I saw it in the mirror." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "You saw in the mirror?" Lydia nodded again, tears spilling now. "It was only a moment." She rose like she was going to the tea table, but she went to the door. It opened a crack. Mr. Markham was there, in the hall. He must have come from the Winter Gallery. She slipped out. No one noticed. "I noticed because I always notice. I have to." Celia's face remained rigid, but her eyes flashed. "Why didn't you say this before?" Lydia's voice broke. "Because Mr. Markham told me. He told me if I spoke he would show Miss Rivington the letters about her mother." Sir Alton made a strangled sound behind us. Poirot's gaze flicked to him, then back. "So he used the letters to control you too?" Lydia nodded. "Yes. He said he would ruin all of you, and he said Mrs. Harrow was his friend, that she understood business." Greaves's face hardened. "And you're telling me she was in the corridor during the alibi? That gives her opportunity." Poirot's tone stayed measured. "It gives opportunity to meet, not yet to kill. The blow that killed Mr. Markham was delivered in the Winter Gallery. Mrs. Harrow might have met him, yes. But why would she leave behind a piano key? Why would she plant stationery? Why would she return to burn papers?" Greaves frowned. For once he was forced to think. Poirot continued. "Mademoiselle Kent, did you see anything else?" Lydia hesitated. After she came back in, she sat down again. But her hands— Lydia rubbed her own palms against her skirt. She was wiping her hands, like she had touched something sticky. Greaves's eyes narrowed. "Blood." Lydia shook her head quickly. No, not blood. Like wax." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Wax." He turned sharply and went back toward the study, and we followed, Lydia stumbling after, Greaves still gripping her wrist as though afraid she might evaporate. Inside the study, Poirot went straight to the portfolio. He did not touch the envelope marked "For After the Music." Instead, he leaned over the desk blotter and examined the surface with fierce attention. Then he pointed. On the corner of the blotter, barely visible, was a faint reddish smear, not blood, but sealing wax, softened and pressed. Poirot's voice was soft with satisfaction. "Yes, wax. Someone sealed something here. Recently." Greaves leaned in. "So what?" Poirot looked up. "So the portfolio did not lie here all night. It was placed here later, and someone sealed the envelope, perhaps the one marked "For After the Music," so that it looks authentic. A theatre, as Madame Harrow said." Celia's voice came tight. "You think she planted it?" Poirot did not answer directly. He looked at Lydia. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "when you say you saw Mrs. Harrow meet Mr. Markham in the corridor, where in the corridor?" Lydia swallowed. "Near the drawing-room door, just outside." Poirot nodded. "And how long?" "Only seconds." Poirot murmured. Seconds are enough to exchange something small. He turned to Greaves. Superintendent, where is Mrs. Harrow now? Greaves's face tightened. In the morning room, with the others. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Then we go quickly. But, his gaze flicked to the envelope again. Not to accuse without certainty. Greaves barked. Then what are we doing? Inviting her for tea? Poirot's expression was calm. We are watching. The murderer thinks I will open the envelope and cause panic. Perhaps I will soon. But first I wish to see whose panic. We moved down the corridor, and as we approached the morning room, a low hum of voices reached us. It had the strained pitch of people forced to sit still with fear, chewing at their insides. Poirot paused just outside the door. He adjusted his tie with exquisite care, as though preparing not for an interrogation but for a social call. Then he opened the door and stepped in. All eyes turned. Mrs. Harrow sat in an armchair near the fire, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed into mourning elegance. Dr. Suresh stood by the window, gaze distant. Wycliffe, under guard, sat rigid and furious. Celia remained by the door, and Sir Alton hovered like a man without bones. Poirot moved to the centre of the room. Mesdames et messieurs, he said mildly, I regret the inconvenience, but the affair becomes more complicated. Mrs. Harrow's eyes widened slightly, performing concern. More complicated? Surely not. Poirot's gaze rested on her for a fraction too long. Then he smiled. Oh yes, he said softly, because now we know there was a meeting arranged after the music, and we know someone in this house heard me say I will not open the envelope yet, and ran away. A ripple went through the room. Dr. Suresh's eyes sharpened. Wycliffe's mouth curled in bitter amusement. Lydia, now standing behind Poirot, trembled. Poirot continued, voice still gentle. One of you is very afraid of what is in that envelope, and one of you perhaps believes that fear will make you safe. Mrs. Harrow let out a small, controlled laugh. What melodrama! Poirot's smile did not reach his eyes. Madam, you enjoy melodrama, but I think today you may find it less amusing. He turned slightly, addressing Greaves. Superintendent, he said, bring the envelope. Greaves blinked. Now. Poirot's eyes were calm, unwavering. Now. Greaves hesitated only a second before striding out, and as he did, I saw something in Mrs. Harrow change, just a flicker, a tightening, as though the elegant mask had slipped and revealed the bare nerve beneath. Poirot saw it too, and in that instant I understood. The next move, whatever it was, would force someone's hand. Greaves returned with the envelope held between finger and thumb, as though it might bite him. Behind him a constable hovered, uncertain whether this was evidence or theatre. Greaves crossed the room and slapped it onto the small table beside Poirot with more force than necessary. There, he said. Happy? Poirot did not touch it immediately. He let it lie there. Small, innocuous, sealed with a neat blob of reddish wax that caught the light. It looked absurdly like a dinner invitation. He glanced around the room, not at faces as a whole, but at details. Mrs. Harrow's fingers tightening around her handkerchief, Dr. Suresh's gaze fixed too steadily on the envelope, Wycliffe's jaw clenching, the muscle jumping, Lydia Kent's shallow breathing, Sir Alton's rigid grey stillness, Celia's chin lifted, eyes bright and unswerving. Poirot's voice was mild. You see? It is nothing. A little envelope, and yet it makes the heart beat. Mrs. Harrow gave a brittle laugh. If you intend to read it aloud, Monsieur Poirot, by all means. We've had enough suspense for one day. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but you, madam. You ask for suspense. That is interesting. Her smile flickered. Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small penknife. He did not angle it toward the seal at once. Instead, he held the blade in the air, as though making a point with it. Before I open, he said, I wish to remind you of something. Mr. Markham was killed in the Winter Gallery. His portfolio vanished. Then someone went to his room and burned paper and left blood. Then Mr. Vale was attacked, also by a thin instrument, and he said the key and study. And now the portfolio appears in the study, with this envelope sealed as if by the hand of Mr. Markham himself. He paused, letting the sequence settle like dust. It is a pattern. Poirot continued, but patterns can be true, or they can be made. Greaves snorted. Just open it. Poirot looked at him with polite reproach. Superintendent, in your haste you always wish to tear the ribbon, but sometimes the ribbon tells us who tied it. He lowered the penknife. With exquisite care he slid the blade beneath the wax seal, not breaking it in half, but lifting it, easing it away in one piece. The seal came off with a soft crack, leaving a faint crescent of wax behind. Poirot removed a folded sheet of paper and held it up, but he did not read at once. He sniffed it, very slightly, like a man assessing perfume. Then he nodded to himself. Greaves leaned forward. Well. Poirot unfolded the paper and read silently for a moment. The room seemed to contract around the soundlessness of his reading. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed a single note, dull, distant, like a warning. At last Poirot looked up. This, he said softly, is not a confession. It is an instruction. Mrs. Harrow's laugh came again, thinner now. How dramatic. What does it instruct, then? Poirot's eyes rested on her just long enough to make her breath hitch. It says, he replied, that after the music, the recipient was to meet Mr. Markham in the Winter Gallery at the statue of Apollo. A murmur went through the room. Dr. Suresha's brows lifted. Wycliffe's mouth tightened. Sir Alton made a small, strangled sound, and Celia's hand went very still on the back of a chair, as though she had grabbed something solid to stop herself from swaying. Poirot continued. Voice still calm. It says also, bring the key. Greaves snapped his head up. The key. The study key. Poirot inclined his head. Yes. Greaves slapped his palm on his thigh. So Vale was right, and Markham set up a meeting. With who? Poirot lowered the paper slightly. The letter begins, My dear D. Mrs. Harrow's hand tightened on her handkerchief until her knuckles whitened. Greaves noticed, and his eyes sharpened with sudden satisfaction. Daphne, he said slowly. My dear Daphne. Mrs. Harrow's chin lifted. Lots of names begin with D, Superintendent. Don't be ridiculous. Poirot's voice was mild. Yes, lots of names, but also, madam, you are the only D in this room. Mrs. Harrow's smile did not return. And you think that means I killed him? Poirot shook his head gently. No, not yet. She stared at him as though he had insulted her with restraint. Poirot went on. There is more. It says, if you do not comply, I will deliver copies to the solicitor, and to Miss Rivington. Celia's eyes narrowed. To me? Poirot nodded. Yes, Mrs. Harrow's voice came sharp. So he threatened her. That's your motive. Why drag my name into it? Poirot's gaze remained calm. Because, madame, your name is already in it. He turned the paper slightly, showing the bottom. There, at the end, was a short line in Markham's hand, an initial and a flourish. Greaves leaned closer and read it, lips moving. Meckham Poirot's eyes softened. Yes, it appears to be his signature. Mrs. Harrow's laugh burst out too loud, too quick. So he wrote to me. He wrote to everyone. He was a bully. That's hardly murder. Poirot nodded. No, it is not murder. Greaves's face darkened again. Poirot. Poirot lifted a hand. Superintendent. One moment. There is something else here. He held the paper to the light, turning it slightly, and I saw the faintest impression in the sheet, like the ghost of words pressed from another page above it. Poirot's eyes narrowed with satisfaction. Ah, he murmured, it is written on a pad. There is indentation. Greaves stared. What does that matter? Poirot's tone remained patient. It matters because the person who wrote this letter also wrote something else on the sheet above it, and if we can read the impression, we may know more. Greaves threw up his hands. We don't have time for parlor tricks. Poirot's eyes turned to him, very calm and very firm. Superintendent, when you have no time, that is precisely when you must be exact. He looked around. May I have a pencil and a sheet of paper? A footman, hovering at the edge, produced them with trembling hands. Poirot laid the letter flat on the table, placed the blank sheet over it, and began to rub gently with the side of the pencil lead. Slow, careful, methodical. Grey shading emerged. Lines, curves, the suggestion of letters. Everyone leaned forward without meaning to. drawn by the quiet magic of it. Gradually a phrase appeared, broken in places, but readable. Poirot stopped, lifted the top sheet, and examined what he had taken. Then he looked up, and for the first time since he entered the house, his expression held something like cold anger. "This," he said softly, "is the interesting part." Greaves snatched at the paper, but Poirot held it just out of reach. His eyes did not leave the room. They moved from face to face as he spoke. The impression says, "Place the mute one key silent at the second piece." A sharp intake of breath came from Lydia. Dr. Suresh's gaze hardened. Wickliffe swore under his breath again, not in anger now, but in shock. Poirot continued, his voice quiet and deadly precise. "So you see," he said, "the letter in the envelope is meant to look like Mr. Markham's trap, but the page above it, where these impressions come from, was not a letter to a lady. It was a set of instructions, a plan." Greaves's face went rigid. "You're saying the envelopes are fake?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Not entirely. Perhaps the meeting was real. Perhaps Markham did write to Mrs. Harrow. But this paper, this pad, this is from someone who planned the signal in the piano, someone who understood that the room would listen, and that one person would act." Mrs. Harrow's face had gone very pale. "This is absurd," she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. "I don't know anything about pianos." Poirot's gaze held hers. "No?" she swallowed. "No." Poirot's voice remained gentle. "Then perhaps you will explain to me why, when Miss Kent said you wiped your hands after the music, it was wax, as from a seal." Mrs. Harrow's breath caught. Her eyes darted to Greaves, then to the door, then back to Poirot. She looked, suddenly, like a woman who had stepped onto ice and heard it crack. Greaves moved, subtly, blocking her nearest path. Poirot, however, did not pounce. He simply watched, and in watching, he gave her room to choose, which is a far crueler thing than accusation. At that moment, from the corridor, a constable's voice called, urgent, "Superintendent." "Doctor says Mr. Vale is asking for Monsieur Poirot. He says it's important. He's not sure how long he can talk." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and I felt the room tilt, everybody sensing that the wounded man downstairs held the missing piece. Poirot turned to Greaves. "You will come." Then his gaze swept the suspects like a net. "And you," he said softly, "you will all remain exactly where you are, because now, mesdames et messieurs, we approach the point where an alibi unbreakable will finally begin to crack." We found Adrian Vale in the library, propped carefully on the sofa, his face drawn and grey, the doctor hovering like an anxious bird. His eyes opened wider when Poirot entered, and for a moment the pain seemed to sharpen him into clarity. "Monsieur Poirot?" Vale rasped. Poirot bent close, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "Mr. Vale, do not strain, only tell me what you must." Vale's fingers twitched against the blanket. "The envelope," he whispered. "Don't believe it." Poirot nodded gently. "I do not." Vale swallowed, the movement visibly painful. "It was planted, in the study. I saw her." Greaves leaned in sharply. "Her? Who?" Vale's eyes flickered, and his gaze slid toward the morning-room door as though even naming the person might summon them. Poirot's voice was calm. "Mr. Vale. One word." Vale's lips trembled. Then he breathed. "Lydia." The name fell into the library like a stone into still water. Greaves straightened with an oath. "The companion?" Vale nodded faintly, sweat beading at his temple. "She came after. She had the key," she said. "She was sorry." Then, his voice broke into a cough, the doctor pressing him down. Poirot's hand lifted. "Enough. Enough. You have done well." Greaves's face was red with anger. "So it's the little mouse after all, the invisible one." Poirot's expression was unreadable. "Invisible, yes. That is why she was chosen." Greaves spun. "Chosen? By whom?" Poirot did not answer at once. He turned and with quiet authority said, "Superintendent. Assemble them, all of them, in the drawing-room." Greaves hesitated, then nodded sharply as though relieved to return to something he understood, the final confrontation. Within minutes the drawing-room was filled again. The suspects gathered like figures in a painting, each face carrying its own private terror. Mrs. Harrow sat stiffly, lips compressed. Captain Wycliffe stood under guard, eyes burning with resentment. Dr. Suresh watched with composed intensity. Sir Alton looked broken, his hands shaking. Celia stood apart, pale and proud, her eyes fixed on Poirot, and Lydia Kent, small, trembling Lydia, stood near the window, hands clasped as though in prayer. Poirot remained standing by the piano. It seemed fitting. The instrument that had provided the alibi, the signal, the silence, now it waited like a witness. Poirot spoke quietly. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have reached the end." Greaves folded his arms, satisfied. "All right then, Poirot. Who is it?" Poirot's eyes moved over them. "This case," he said, "was built upon an alibi so perfect that it appeared unbreakable. Miss Rivington played while Mr. Markham was killed. 8 people swore she never moved." Celia's jaw tightened. "And yet," Poirot continued, "the murderer did not need her to move. The murderer needed only that everyone would watch her, listen to her, and miss everything else." He turned slightly, indicating the mirror. The drawing-room mirror allowed a person to see the corridor without turning. One could meet, exchange, signal, and return without suspicion. Mrs. Harrow's voice cut in, sharp. "Are you accusing me again?" Poirot regarded her gently. "Madam, you were part of the theatre, but you were not the hand that struck." Her eyes widened. "What?" Poirot nodded. "You met Markham. You were threatened. You were frightened. But you are not a murderer. You are an opportunist." Mrs. Harrow's lips parted, then closed again. Poirot's gaze moved on. "Captain Wycliffe, you were desperate, but you did not kill. You only panicked when you thought Sir Alton would fall." Wycliffe spat bitterly. "Damn right." Poirot inclined his head. "Dr. Suresh, you observed. You noticed the draught, the movement, but you acted with honesty." Dr. Suresh's face remained still. Poirot turned at last toward Lydia. "Mademoiselle Kent," he said softly. Lydia flinched as though struck. "You were the perfect instrument," Poirot continued. "Invisible, unnoticed. A companion whose presence was taken for granted." Lydia whispered, "No." Poirot's voice remained gentle, almost sorrowful. "Markham chose you. He told you that you could have money, freedom, a life beyond service. He told you to listen, to carry messages, to slip through corridors like a shadow." Lydia shook her head, tears spilling. "He was cruel." He. "Yes," Poirot said quietly. "He was cruel, and cruelty creates dangerous things." Greaves snapped, "Get on with it. Did she kill him or not?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "No," he said. "Not at first." The room froze. Poirot went on. "Markham arranged a meeting after the music. He demanded the key. He demanded letters. He demanded power. But someone else arranged something more subtle, the silent piano key, the mute placed beneath the instrument. A signal only one person would understand. That signal was not for Miss Rivington. It was not for Mrs. Harrow. It was for Lydia Kent." Lydia's breath hitched. Poirot stepped closer. When the second piece began, one key fell silent. Lydia, who had been instructed, slipped out. She met Markham in the corridor. He took her to the Winter Gallery, because there, among statues, voices do not carry. And there, Poirot's voice lowered. He intended to use her once more, to take the letters, to take the portfolio, to take whatever he wanted. Lydia sobbed. "I didn't want." Poirot's eyes were steady. "But something happened. Markham underestimated you. He thought you were only invisible. He forgot that invisible people have hearts, and hearts can break." Lydia's shoulders shook violently. "He threatened Miss Rivington. He threatened you. He threatened Sir Alton. And in that moment, you struck." Greaves barked. "With what?" Poirot lifted his hand. "With something thin. Convenient. An ice-pick from the servants' pantry. A pen later, in the library. One sharp blow. Quiet. Efficient." Lydia cried out. "I didn't mean he wouldn't stop. He said he'd ruin her, ruin all of us." Poirot nodded sadly. "Afterward, panic. You returned to the drawing-room. The music covered your absence. No one noticed the invisible girl slipping back into place. But then you realized what Markham carried. The portfolio, the papers, the poison. You hid it. You returned to his room to destroy what you could. You burned fragments. Sir Alton's crest appeared in the ash because Markham had used his stationery for threats, and then Mr. Vale saw you. Greaves's eyes narrowed. So you attacked him. Lydia collapsed into sobs. He said he would tell. He looked at me like I was nothing. Poirot's voice was firm now. He was not nothing. He was a man doing his duty. And you struck again, because murder once begun becomes easier. Lydia sank to her knees, hands covering her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered brokenly. "I'm sorry. I only wanted it to stop." Celia stood utterly still, her face pale marble, but her voice came out clear. "You killed him for me." Lydia looked up, tears streaming. "For you. For myself. For all of us." Poirot's expression softened. "It was not for justice," he said quietly. "It was for desperation, and desperation is never clean." Greaves stepped forward, cuffs ready. "It's over," he snapped. Lydia did not resist. She only wept. As she was led away, the room seemed to exhale as though Vane Court itself had been holding its breath since the first silent piano note. Sir Alton sank into a chair, covering his face. "My God," he whispered. "My God." Celia stood a moment longer, then crossed to the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Poirot watched her gently. "The music," she said softly, "was meant to protect me." Poirot nodded, and instead, "It became the mask," Poirot said. "But masks fall, mademoiselle. Always." Celia's voice trembled for the first time. "Will it ever feel clean again?" Poirot's eyes were kind but truthful. "No," he said softly, "not entirely. Such things leave their shadow, but you will live. And that, perhaps, is the only justice the innocent may claim." Greaves cleared his throat awkwardly, suddenly less triumphant. "We'll take her away," he muttered. "Proceedings, statements," Poirot inclined his head. When they were gone, silence filled the drawing-room. Only the piano remained, black and gleaming, as though it too remembered the missing note. Poirot turned to me, smoothing his cuffs as he always did when restoring order to his own mind. "Hastings," he said quietly, "you see, the unbreakable alibi was never unbreakable. It was only misunderstood." I swallowed. "And Markham?" Poirot's mouth tightened. "A man who believed he could control souls with paper and threats. In the end, he discovered that even the invisible have limits." He sighed, a rare sound from him. "The tragedy, my friend, is that the murderer is not always the monster we imagine. Sometimes it is the frightened person no one sees." Celia remained by the piano, staring down at the keys. Poirot placed his hat upon his head with immaculate care. "Come," he said softly to me. "We leave this house to its silence, and perhaps to its music again one day." And with that, Hercule Poirot departed, as composed as ever, yet carrying, as he always did, the quiet weight of human nature's darkest contradictions within his little grey cells. The affair at the Unbreakable Alibi was solved, but the echo of that missing note would linger long after the last door closed.